welcome.
Good morning.
I hope everybody is as excited as I am that we have the governor here with us this morning. A few weeks ago, he indicated that he wanted to come address GDC staff, and he was very clear that he wanted to be able to address our folks that work in the field and our facilities. So that's the reason that we're here today at Tift. And we're very thankful that he's taken the time out of his busy schedule to do that. Many of you have heard me say how important it is, I believe, to have balance in your life. It makes for a happier, more content individual, and it's an employee who, generally speaking, is more dependable and generally a better decision maker. I believe that balance comes in three areas, and in order of importance, there are faith, family, and mission. When I think of who exemplifies that, I think of the governor. He is a true person of faith, and I'm sure that you will hear that loud and clear when he speaks in just a minute. When you see him with his wife, his children, his grandchildren, you know that he is devoted to them, and you know how important family is to him. And thankfully for all of us, he chose his life's mission to be public service. He has worn many hats in his career, but they have always been focused on public service. That service has been not only to the citizens of our state, but also to the citizens of our country. Please join me in a warm welcome for the governor of the great state of Georgia, Nathan Deal.
Thank you, Commissioner. Good morning and Merry Christmas to all of you. When I heard that you were having this meeting, I did request that I have a few minutes just to speak to you and tell you some very important things from my point of view. First of all, I start by thanking you for what you do. I realize the difficulty of the task that we ask you to undertake. I realize that you are not working sometimes under the most admirable conditions because, quite honestly, if you were dealing with Sunday school graduates, you would have a much easier job, I'm sure. Although you've got a few Sunday school graduates that you have to deal with, I'm sure of that as well. I want you to understand that I do place a value on you and what you do. The number one priority of anyone elected to the governorship of the state of Georgia is the safety and security of its citizens. We cannot provide those necessary ingredients of leadership without you. You are the hands and the eyes and the ears that helps keep our society safe. Now, admittedly, you are dealing with individuals who have gone through a rather extended process in some cases before they arrive in the institutions where you work. Hopefully, you have seen already some response on the part of the governor from the budget for the past year or so. And I hope as we unveil the budget for this next legislative session that starts the second week in January, you will be pleased with what you will see in that budget as well. I know that it takes money for you to support yourself and your family, and we're going to try to do our best to improve your lot and your job. As you know, we have undertaken during the 5 years that I have now been the governor of this state, we've undertaken a very serious look at the general topic of criminal justice reform. The reasons for doing that were pretty obvious when I came into office. In my first State of the State address to the General Assembly and to the people of this state, I made criminal justice reform a priority. And the reason was, at that point in time, we were the 10th largest population state overall, but we had the fourth largest prison population. That disconnect did not make a whole lot of sense. When I appointed a Criminal Justice Reform Commission, I gave them some very definite charges. Let's tackle this problem and see if we can find a way out of it. Because I was being told that by 2016, which as you know is just right around the corner, I was going to have to build 2 additional adult prisons at the cost of about $264 million, because we were going to need 5,000 new prison beds. Now, as a result of the reforms that we put in place, instead of seeing that 8% a year increase in the prison population, we've actually seen a decrease. We have dropped about 3,000 in terms of overall prison population. And how has that happened? As our prison population has dropped, our overall state population has grown from the 10th largest state to the 8th largest state in a short 4.5 to 5 year period. So people are coming to our state, and if we want them to continue to come and to have good jobs and provide for you and your children and your grandchildren with good jobs, we have to make sure that, that the employers feel like their workers are going to be safe. And that's important for all of us. Something caught up with me this morning. Now, we started the reforms on the front end. I thought it was a logical place to start because we were told that we were incarcerating too many people who, by our own system of classification, were said to be nonviolent. Now, admittedly, most of those in those categories had some form of addiction, whether it be drugs, whether it be alcohol, or a combination of both of those. But nevertheless, they had not moved by virtue of their criminal actions. They had not moved into the violent category. Obviously, we would like to make sure they don't. Pardon just a second. So when we started on the front end, we said, how do you divert nonviolent offenders away from a prison system that costs somewhere between $18,000 to $19,000 per bed per year, which is very expensive, as you know. How do we divert them, and who should we divert? We had a model that was somewhat small in its presence in our state, referred to in general terms as accountability courts. Those are courts, DUI courts, drug courts, increasingly mental health courts, and now most recently, veterans courts. And some of you are dealing with some of those very distinct population groups, and I am very pleased within the correctional system already that I'm seeing that you're dealing with the veterans in a specific way. I think that's altogether appropriate, and of course it does allow us in some instances to tap into the benefit package by virtue of their having served our country in uniform. But nevertheless, the approach was, let's see if we can deal with this nonviolent category more effectively without having to lock them up. We have expanded the accountability courts in our state significantly, and we are seeing, the last statistic I had was in the early part of 2014, we had over 4,000 individuals who were in any variety of those alternative courts throughout our state. In the past, almost all of those would have been in the institutions and the facilities where you work. By getting them out of those systems, it allows them to have an opportunity, if they will take advantage of that, to change the direction of their lives before they enter the prison system. Now, that is, on the first glance, some people would say, well, that's just being soft on crime. I don't take it that way, quite frankly. I think it's being smart on crime. And that's the whole theory and theme behind what we're trying to do and what we have asked you to be a part of doing. It doesn't do us any good to lock somebody up for a specific period of time. If, when they are released, and as you know, most of them at some point in time will be released. Doesn't do us any good to lock them up if, when they are released, they have not changed. They are, in fact, maybe more hardened than they were when they came in, and they still pose a threat to society. If we can change that dynamic, then we will have changed this state. And quite frankly, we're changing the nation too, because we are now recognized as one of the leaders, in fact, maybe the leader, in meaningful criminal justice reform. So we're trying to divert those nonviolent offenders away from our correctional institutions. Now, as I said, that's not an easy task. My son is a Superior Court judge up in North Georgia, and he is the judge for a drug court in the Northeastern Judicial Circuit. And he tells me that many times when someone is in his drug court and they've been there for several months, that they'll come back to him and say, "Judge, if I had known it was going to be this hard, I'd have told you just to go ahead and send me to prison. I could make my time easier than I can live up to the expectations of this drug court." Because what it does is what the name says. It's an accountability court. It is holding people accountable for their conduct and rewarding them if they change. Now, sometimes that's hard to do, holding people accountable for their conduct. Sometimes people have that attitude. Well, I'll just make my time and you won't change the direction of my life. I'll go back and I'll resume right where I left off when I was sent to prison. Well, those folks, we've got a good prison bed for them. If they don't have any intentions of changing, those are the kind of folks that prisons are made for. But for those who are willing to take advantage of a second chance, whether it is those on the front end of our system, going into accountability courts so that they never come into your facilities, then that is very, very good. And quite frankly, folks, maybe you have heard it too, but I've heard it from all across this state where we have accountability courts operating. People that will come up to me, and remarkably, the most common phrase they say is, "Drug court saved my life." Now, sometimes when my wife and I are out shopping, and usually it's her shopping and me accompanying her, at first we would go to the Dawsonville outlets because that's close to where we live. And on numerous occasions, we would have usually a young lady who would say to us, "I love your son. He's my drug court judge. And I'm going to graduate in about 2 months." I would look around and I would see, I said, "I don't believe I'd have said that too much in public here." And when that scenario kept repeating itself, I realized, unlike my reaction, that they should be ashamed of the fact that they were in drug court, they were in fact proud of that fact. And they were proud of themselves at being successful. And for many of them, that may be the first real achievement of success that they've ever had in their life. Too bad we have to wait that long in a person's life for them to find out that if they will comply with the rules and make changes internally, it can change the direction of their life. So we're making a difference on the front end. By the way, as controversial as that may have sounded, the General Assembly of this state, 56 senators and 180 members of the House, passed that piece of legislation unanimously. Very few times do you have anything that passes unanimously. So instead of being controversial, it became something that the members of the General Assembly were willing to embrace. The second year, we had juvenile justice reform. And for those of you who have worked in the juvenile system and see juveniles, you know that the magnitude of the problems there have escalated in the last decade or so. And the seriousness of the offenses that they're involved with has also escalated. But we were having an equally difficult time in our juvenile justice arena, and some would say even more difficult time, because in the adult arena, we were seeing about 1 out of every 3 that were paroled out of our system come back within 3 years or less. In the juvenile system, we were seeing about 65% of them who were released from the juvenile system come back within 3 years or less. And of course, many of them, because of their age, were coming back as adult offenders. And if the $18,000 to $19,000 a year for a prison bed for an adult is expensive, and it is, it was $91,000 is what it was costing us per juvenile on an annual basis, because you have to do so many more things for juveniles. Just because they violated the law does not relieve government of its other responsibilities, and it's very costly. So we followed a similar model on the juvenile reform of community-based alternative programs. And I'm proud to tell you that it has been hugely successful. We are seeing those who would otherwise have been in those very expensive juvenile facilities now being able to succeed in a community-based alternative program. Now that is difficult for many reasons. One is, it is difficult for them to continue an education, and it becomes the state's responsibility more than it was when they were just in free society, because many of them have been expelled from school. And when they're sent back home, they're not allowed to return to school. And the state has the responsibility, however, to continue an educational opportunity for them. So it is a more difficult challenge, but it is being hugely successful. We have seen a drop in felony-type convictions for our juvenile population in some of the communities where these alternative programs are existing by as much as 65% drop. So it is working, and it is doing so in a much more cost-effective fashion. It doesn't cost $91,000 a person to do it in a community-based alternative program. The third year is where you come in. And by the way, that one passed unanimously in the General Assembly as well, the second year. The third year was the actions that we're taking within the facilities where you work. We called it transition, support, and reentry. And what it was designed to do was to make sure that we could reduce our recidivism rate when someone leaves our state facilities. We didn't want them coming back. But when we did a survey of the inmates in our system, we were trying to find out what common characteristics do they have. And quite honestly, the most common characteristic that we found was that almost 7 out of every 10 dropped out of school. Now that is a staggering number, but I'm sure if you talk to the ones that you deal with within your institutions, you will probably find that number is fairly accurate. I made that statement to a group of Superior Court judges, and I had at least one of them and others that agreed with the statement. He said, "Governor, I want you to know that almost 100% of the young men that come before my court for a criminal offense have dropped out of school." So, if that is a common characteristic, is that characteristic something that is going, if left unchanged, is it something that is going to reduce our recidivism rate, or is it going to continue to fuel it? I contend that it is something has to be dealt with, and that's what we're dealing with within the systems where you work. And I know that that is not a totally new concept, but the acceleration of emphasis on that, I feel sure you're already seeing, and hopefully you're being a part of. I commend the commissioner and all of those who work in the department for embracing this idea. I truly believe that it may be the only long-term solution to breaking the cycle of crime and breaking, in some cases, the cycle of poverty that is associated with it. So, that's where we are. I've just seen the new device that is now being employed. I understand it's in our female institutions already and will soon be in the male institutions of a little device that will allow them to have access to educational information, and hopefully those who are willing to take advantage of it will see themselves elevated. Now, we recognize that there are many things that have to happen. First of all, somebody has to be willing on their part. You can't make somebody learn. If they don't want to learn, they're not going to learn. But I believe that there are a great many of them who, when finally confronted with the fact that they cannot continue a life of crime and want to do something to change that direction of their life, will take advantage of it. I am an optimist in that regard. I believe there will be significantly more in that category than the average man on the street would ever think was possible. And that's a good thing if they do. If they're willing to embrace the opportunity to change the direction of their life by getting an education, by learning a skill, then the chances of them coming back to the facilities where you work, that is greatly diminished. And that's a good thing for all of us. So, that's sort of the scenario. The reforms that we put in place, I think, are good reforms. They're already producing positive results in the short term. The part that you deal with, however, is probably a little more long term. The importance of giving someone an equal opportunity for a job, and by the way, we have, as they say, banned the box in state employment. That is, if you have in the past been required on an application for a job to check the box, have you ever been convicted of a felony? In most situations, that application never gets past the desk of the human resources officer charged with the responsibility of hiring and firing. It's thrown in the trash can or simply discarded. In state government, our agency heads have been instructed to give someone at least the opportunity to explain to the agency head that they're asking for a job with, to explain what they did, what has happened to change the direction of their life, if they've taken advantage of getting an education or an improvement in their education skills, to be able to explain that. I think that's only fair. If we ask them to put out the effort to improve themselves, we ought to give them a chance to tell somebody what they've done to improve themselves. Because quite frankly, if they can't get a job, if they don't have a place to live, they're going to come back. That's just human nature. And if we can break that, then we'll have gone a very long way to changing the dynamic of corrections in the state of Georgia. Now, you are a very important part of making that transition successful. I know you deal with difficult situations on a daily basis, and I would not dare say to let your guard down. You can't afford to. We don't want you to. But we do want you to do this. We want you to be encouragers, and I'm sure in many instances you already are encouragers. Encourage people to look at things differently than they looked at it before they came into your institution. Encourage them to see that there is a way that your life can be different. I'm convinced many of them don't think their life can be any different. And if their life can't be any different, then they need to be as good a criminal as they can be, because that's their life. Now, there are going to be some of those who will never change that opinion. As I said earlier, that's what prison beds are for. And as we have made these transitions and these changes, the percentage of the inmate population that is classified as violent offenders and sex offenders, that percentage of the overall population has increased. And the percentage of those that are classified as nonviolent has continued to drop. I think that is the pattern that we would like to see. We know that we're going to have to always have prisons because there are people who just will not abide by the rules of society. But for those who will, even though they may have violated it in the first place, if they're willing to change direction, then it behooves us all to try to make sure they're successful in that effort. So, I conclude as I started. Thank you for what you do every day. What you do makes a difference. Now, you may not think so. You may get tired and bored and feel like that this is a hopeless undertaking. But I'm here to tell you it's not. We see positive results coming out of your actions. We see things happening that maybe you don't see because it takes a long period of time sometimes to witness the final results of a positive step in the right direction. But you're on the firing line. I want you to be an encourager not only of them to change their direction while they're in your system. I want you to encourage them to take advantage of the educational opportunities that are going to be afforded them. Many of them probably have not much use for a little electronic device other than for criminal purposes. And that's not what those devices are for. Those devices are going to be to provide them opportunities to learn, to acquire skills, to get a GED, to do the normal things that would have been done had they taken advantage of it while they were younger. But without your encouragement, many of them are not going to see any reason to do that. So please encourage them to do it. I know that those that you work with here in the Department of Corrections are going to do their very best to make this work. It is to our advantage, it is to your advantage that we make it work. Now, let me politic with you just a little bit, okay? At this time of year, we all are very looking forward to being with families, celebrating the Christmas season, and all of the nice things that are normally associated with that. But there are young people in our state who, because of family circumstances or otherwise, don't have a very bright Christmas, and more significantly, don't have a very bright future. This past session of the General Assembly, I asked them to undertake a very difficult task, and that is to give the state the right to intervene in chronically failing schools. That is, schools that for 3 or more consecutive years have never scored above an F on their evaluation reports. We have 80,000 children who are required to attend those chronically failing schools. Now, if you want to know what your future inmates are going to look like, go visit a couple of those schools. You'll see their faces. Because just as almost 7 out of 10 that are already in your institution dropped out of school, this is the fodder that feeds the machine to supply inmates into the prison system. So what I'm saying is we're trying to work your way out of this job that you're in. We're trying to reduce that inflow. If we can cut down on the inflow, then we can use the savings, we can use the improvement of the quality of life, and we can break that cycle that has victimized so many families in our state. I dare say there are probably some of you in this room today who are old enough to see that you maybe had the grandfather or the grandmother at some point in time, or the father or the mother at some time in your system, and now you're dealing with the granddaughter or the grandson who's following in their patterns. In my early career, I was an assistant district attorney prosecuting criminal cases in 4 counties in northeast Georgia. And that was the most common thing that we saw, was that we were gradually moving from the parents to the children who were following in the footsteps that had been laid out for them by their family. We need to break that cycle, and I believe we can if we all work together. It's going to take your help. We can have the best plans in the world, but if you don't buy into it, if you're not willing to support it, if you're not willing to encourage those with whom you work to take advantage of it, then we won't have the success that we want. So in conclusion, I thank you for what you've done. I didn't follow up on my thought about what we were doing about those failing schools dinner. That was my political point. I don't need to leave that out. We asked the General Assembly this year to put a constitutional amendment on the ballot for November of 2016 to give the people of this state the right to say, yes, we believe the state should intervene in these chronically failing schools. I am hopeful that as you look at that and as you listen to the reasons behind it, that you can see fit to support it and that you will encourage others to do so. It is not a matter of the state wanting to take over somebody's school. The most ridiculous thing I've ever heard is comments coming from counties that don't have any failing schools, and the educators there saying, well, don't vote for this, we don't want them taking over our school. Well, you know, the best way to keep anybody from taking over your school is make sure it doesn't fail. Make sure it doesn't fail for 3 years. Can you imagine going into a restaurant with your family and you're looking at the health department score on the board and it's a 60? You're not going to eat there. You're going to turn around and leave. But in those 80,000 children's lives, they are being required to have their minds fed in a school that has never scored above an F. It's just not right. I'm working to try to make a difference there, just as you're working to try to make a difference in the jobs that you have. Thank you very much, and I wish for all of you and your families a very Merry Christmas. Thank you.
Thank the governor again for taking the time to be with us today, and I hope everyone takes to heart his words and how important you are with criminal justice reform in your day-to-day interactions with inmates in our facilities. Extremely important, that one-on-one, there's no substitute for it. I hope everyone has a safe and happy holidays. Merry Christmas. Y'all are dismissed.